Hey guys, Andrew Davidson here with As Per My Ability. Thanks for checking out another History in Board Games episode. This is number 2. This is a series that I created where I take a historical game and I couple it with some supplemental things such as a movie to watch, a book to read, or a podcast to check out that'll kind of supplement the historical aspect of the game that I'm recommending. So in today's episode, I hope you're in for the long haul because it's about a 44-year long haul as we jump into the Cold War.
Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner.
Iron Curtain has descended across the country.
The only answer to communism is a massive offensive for freedom.
Communism must be a system of international control and conformity.
You and I have a rendezvous with death.
Never give in. Never.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hey, so what you were just listening to is actually a part of my recommendation for this episode. If you haven't already guessed, we are talking about the Cold War, a part of American history. It lasted for 44 years, if you can believe that. And so what I'm recommending is a podcast. It's a podcast I've been listening to. It's narrated by Bill Whittle, and it is called What We Saw, the Cold War. And you can get it on any place you get podcasts, on iTunes, or it's even on YouTube if you want to look up the YouTube channel and listen to it on YouTube. So it's a podcast that starts off kind of with a little mini thing about the space race. And there was, for those of you that don't know, there was a space race between America and the USSR in regards to putting a man in space, putting a man on the moon, and there's some really interesting stuff there. But then it almost relaunches itself into like a second season where the podcast goes through the whole narrative of the Cold War. How did it start? All the events that happened along the way. But what's good about the podcast and why I'm recommending it is because it's told from a real narrative aspect. It's not just names and dates and figures and history and this and that. It's kind of told from like not really a good guys and bad guys kind of a thing, but just from like a personal story, a personal narrative. The narrator, as I said, Bill Whittle, is a guy that kind of puts his own story into it as he's an older gentleman that kind of lived through a lot of this stuff, a lot of the moon landings and things like that. So it's got a real personal kind of a story element to it. And so that's what I'm recommending. What We Saw, the Cold War, for the podcast. Now in the gamer terms, we're going to be basically talking about Twilight Struggle. Now Twilight Struggle is the Cold War in a box. And it lasts about as long as the Cold War actually lasted. It's a pretty long game. I'm not going to go over all of it, but let me show you a little bit of an overview of Twilight Struggle so that way you can kind of see what this game is about. So here's a look at Twilight Struggle. This is just the board. It's not even set up yet, and holy cow, there's a lot going on in this game. So having said that, I am going to just give a very brief overview of how the game feels. There are a lot of rules. There's a lot going on in this game. So let's get started. First things first. This is a 2-player only game. One player will take on the role of the USA over here, and the other player will take on the role of the USSR over here. The game can last up to 10 rounds, which is denoted up here. You got your early war, your mid war, and your late war. Or it can last when someone gets 20 points, which is not really completely in the frame because it's such a huge board, but there is a point track down here. If someone can get to 20 points, then they can win. So the game doesn't necessarily always last 10 rounds. The goal of the game is for the two factions to basically control different areas on the board by placing influence out on their side. So right-hand side for the Soviets, left-hand side for the Americans. And you're going to be controlling certain parts of the board, and when those parts are scored, for example, when Europe is scored, you will add up points, and things like that. You can also do coups in this game. You can do realignment of forces in this game. You can also run in the space race, which I think is awesome right here. There's a space race track. there are a lot of things that you can do in this game. The game is over when someone hits 20 or when the 10th round is complete. Or if a player ever causes the what they call DEFCON status to go down to nuclear war, you've lost the game. The player that triggers this loses the game. So, because nuclear war is bad, right? What players are going to be doing on their turn is they're going to be playing cards, basically. And how the cards work is they're all divided into early war, mid-war, or late war, depending on what part you're at in the game. And when they play them, they can play them for their influence points denoted by the stars, or they can play the event. They can do one or the other. Some of the cards work for both factions, some of them don't. You might get a Soviet card. This is a Soviet card because it's red, as the USA player, which means that I can still use the influence, but I cannot use the text. I allow my player to use the text. So knowing when to play these cards is a huge, huge part of the game. And when you do the space race, you can just discard a card to basically roll on the space race track. So if you have a card that you don't want to allow your opponent to trigger their thing, you could just simply discard it. But you can only do the space race once per round. And so it goes through the course of a bunch of different rounds where people will be fighting over different areas. There is a setup to it in regards to how the game sets up, where the USA starts, where the USSR starts, and then there's also some variability because you get to spend a certain amount of influence to place on the board in certain parts of the board. And so this game is incredibly heavy. I would not recommend it to people that want a light experience or a game that they don't have to put a whole lot of strategic thought into. I would not recommend this game for people that don't want to play a 2 to 3 hour game. This is a very long game, by the way. If I haven't already made that clear, it is quite long. The next thing is I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to people that aren't into the Cold War. Now, I know I'm alienating a lot of people, and normally people, when it comes to board games, they say, you don't need to know. You don't need to know much. Just play the game. Just play along. Just learn the mechanics and play. See if you can win. Obviously, if you don't study the Cold War, if you don't know much about the Cold War, if you didn't live through the Cold War, if you don't know what the Cuban Missile Crisis means, that's fine and good. You still can play whatever you want to play, enjoy whatever you want to enjoy. But the cards that you play are all very, very relevant to historical things. And some cards will trigger other cards that will come out later in the game. And so if I play a card, I won't be able to play the next card unless if I play the first one. So there's kind of like prerequisites for a lot of the cards. Card A has to be played in order for card B to be relevant, to be able to be played for its full value. So there's a lot of strategy in the game. There's a lot of historical stuff. The cards are all like real life things that happen. And so without a fundamental understanding of really like what's going on with this world, what happened over the course of 44 years in these two countries' history, a lot of it's going to be lost. Does that mean you can't enjoy the board game? Absolutely not. Does it mean that you can't win? No, you can totally win. You just have to outthink, outsmart, and out-strategize your opponent. And so this is just basically a real quick overview of Twilight Struggle. So let's get back to my thoughts. So there you go. There's an overview of Twilight Struggle. It feels really cool. Now there's a lot of things that I didn't go over in the video. As I said, there's a really long game. It's a very involved game. It's a 2-player game. It really does bring out through the cards, the flavor in the cards, some of the events that trigger other events. It really does feel like the Cold War. And so my 2 recommendations for this video is What We Saw, the Cold War, narrated by Bill Whittle. It's a podcast that you can find, and also Twilight Struggle by GMT Games. I hope you guys will come back for episode 3 that I'm currently planning, where we will be hitting American history again, but this time probably in about the early 70s. So, as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you all at the next video.